Live Fit Podcast, episode 103, Never Binge Again, with Dr. Glenn Livingston. Listen as he shares his plight with bulimia.
When I was younger, I had what you might call today exercise bulimia, which means that I love to eat and I love to exercise, and I figured out that if I exercise a lot, I could eat as much as I wanted to because I was kind of tall and muscular. And I couldn't throw up, so it wasn't traditional bulimia.
As he entered the professional world, got married, and became a homeowner, he found that he didn't have the time to exercise as much as he had been. He became frightened when he saw his weight go up, and he didn't know if he could control it.
I kind of drove me more to food, and I started gaining more weight. And it was kind of like the food itself and all the thoughts about food took over my life. And I'd be sitting there with a couple trying to counsel them through an affair. And really what I'd be thinking about is when can I go get a whole pizza, or when can I go get 5 chocolate bars?
He needed a solution, so he began researching and put together a study which turned into a technique to overcome binge eating and food obsession disorder. He has a very clear and simple way that he will explain later in the show, but here's a hint. He doesn't believe that 12-step programs work for most people.
I took my journal notes about it for myself and turned it into a book, published it last year, and it became the best-selling book on Amazon for months now on binge eating and overeating.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Ah, yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I really do appreciate you being out there. If you haven't done so already, please rate, review, subscribe, and most importantly, share this episode with somebody you care about, because you just may be saving their life. Today I'm speaking with my brother from a different father, Dr. Glenn Livingston, and we're going to talk about how he overcame binge eating and food obsession and how others can do the same. Dr. Livingston was disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and obese individuals. He spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and his self-funded program that had more than 40,000 individuals. But most importantly was his own personal journey out of obesity and food prison to a normal, healthy weight and a much more lighthearted relationship with food. I hope you guys like this interview. Please let me know at glenn@livefitpodcast.com, or better yet, share it on your social media. You can find me at facebook.com/livefitnow. Now I'd like to play my interview with Dr. Glenn Livingston. I hope you enjoy it. Talk to you again on the other side. It's really good to have you on the show. I understand you have a book that is probably of a great deal of interest to a lot of people called Never Binge Again. But before we go into that, maybe you could give us a little background on who you are and how you got to be who you are today.
I'd be happy to do that. Stop me if I go on too long, and please call me Glenn.
You bet.
So the short version is that when I was younger, I had what you might call today exercise bulimia, which means that I love to eat and I love to exercise, and I figured out that if I exercise a lot, I could eat as much as I wanted to because I was kind of tall and muscular. And I couldn't throw up, so it wasn't traditional bulimia. Mm-hmm. And as I got older and I took on responsibilities, started seeing patients and, got married and had a house and everything like that, I couldn't find the time to exercise in the way that I did before. And so I started gaining weight. And then I started getting frightened, and then I kind of drove me more to food, and I started gaining more weight. And it was kind of like the food itself and all the thoughts about food took over my life. And I'd be sitting there with a couple trying to counsel them through an affair. And really what I'd be thinking about is when can I go get a whole pizza, or when can I go get 5 chocolate bars? And being a psychologist from a family of 17 psychologists and psychotherapists and social workers and such. I look for purely psychological motives, and I went to see some of the best psychologists and psychiatrists around. I went to Overeaters Anonymous for a long time, tried to nurture my inner wounded child to figure out the solution. I even, because I don't have kids and I don't commute, so I was also a corporate consultant. And so I knew how to build these large studies, and so I built a large study. I got 40,000 people in it to look at the relationship between psychology and food, blah, blah, blah. We found a lot of interesting things. I learned a lot, but none of it helped. And then I found a very kind of crude and practical, somewhat startling way to go about it, and I had to refine it over a couple of years. Started to work for me, and it worked for clients. I took my journal notes about it for myself and turned it into a book. Published it last year, and it became the best-selling book on Amazon for months now on binge eating and overeating. So,
wow,
that's who I am, and that's what I do.
That's pretty awesome. Best-selling book on Amazon. That's
for those categories. Yeah.
Yeah, that's big time. And this is something that I've been interested in over, periodically throughout my career, starting when I was back in school. And it was because we were forced to read a book called Pretty Good for a Girl. And I didn't want to read the book, but once I got into it and started reading it, I really, really found that it was quite eye-opening to a world I knew nothing about, literally knew almost nothing about. And it's, for those of you that are unfamiliar, it's written by a woman named Leslie Haywood, and she had a eating disorder in that she was anorexic. She wouldn't eat very much, but she also was an over-exerciser. She exercised to excess and to the point where she was definitely addicted, but it was also causing damage. And so and what's so sad about this is it takes years and years and years and years and years and years and years to overcome. And so I'm really keen on stopping any of these things before they start with primarily young people, because that's who get afflicted with it the most, but anybody. Do you have any familiarity with that book?
I don't have familiarity with the book. I do have familiarity with the idea that it takes years and years and years to stop. And I'm not, by the way, I have to, would it be possible that at this interview we could consider me to be a layperson as opposed to a psychologist? Because I'd like to say some things that are outside of the standards of care of my practice, because I have different opinions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's however you want to approach it.
Yeah.
If you want to give a disclaimer and before the next sentence, and you can, if you want to flip flop back and forth between hats, just tell us which one you're wearing at the time.
Well, my work with Never Binge Again is as a coach, because I have some opinions that are different than the standard treatment industry. And so what I'm going to say today is really all from the perspective of a coach and an educator, as opposed to using my license as a psychologist. And that opinion is this. The research that I've seen on food addiction and on addiction in general doesn't really jive with the notion that it's not possible to stop, that it requires this long, detailed treatment, that you have to figure out the underlying emotional causes before you can stop, that you need a big program and group support around you in order to stop. I think there are very valuable functions of delving deep into your psychology and doing soul searching and developing community support. And I think that's part of a healthy life. But I think a big part of the reason that a lot of people have difficulty stopping and why it can take so many years is that the whole industry and the whole culture has kind of swallowed the 12-step notion that you can't quit, you can only stop one day at a time, and this is much more powerful than you are, and you've got to get some good old-time religion before you can really stop that. And I certainly suffered for many, many years with my own eating difficulties because of that. When there was really a very simple and practical way to take care of the behavior. The underlying issues that the behavior might have masked, that's a different story. But you can take care of the behavior and then face the underlying issues. And ask any therapist, when people are not acting out, when they're not overindulging on food or drugs or alcohol, it's much easier to address those underlying issues than when they are acting out. So I really think the behavior comes first. I think we need to address the behavior first. And that's why I made that disclaimer, and I'll stop talking about that now.
Well, I'm curious what you mean by we swallowed the 12-step program, inferring that your idea is different. Is it like a Band-Aid? You just rip it off? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the 12-step program says that we're not capable of stopping, that we should cultivate fear of our own bodies. We should be frightened of the cravings, that we need to run to a sponsor the moment that we have a really strong craving, otherwise it's going to overwhelm us, that there's no human defense against the craving, that we're powerless against it, that we can't quit, we can only stop one day at a time. And that works for some people, but not most in my experience. And it's, if you think about it, it's an abdication of free will and responsibility. It seems compassionate on its surface, and it's very seductive because people feel ashamed of what they've been doing with food or alcohol or drugs. But what you sacrifice for the mitigation of the shame is the power to take responsibility for your own life. And I really think that's a mistake, and I think it actually prevents a lot of people from learning to control their eating, learning to control their drinking and alcohol for that matter too. So that's what I mean by that. And I know it's kind of a bold statement, and I don't make it lightly. I was part of those programs for a while, and I used to refer a lot of people to those programs. So I think it's a really well-considered statement, and I know it puts me in a very controversial position, but that's what I think.
Well, all the best ideas were controversial at first, maybe even for quite a long time. And now so much of, the thought that was controversial and veered from standard accepted thought is now our standard accepted thought. So who's to say that you're wrong? I'm certainly not. And furthermore, if it works, that's the proof right there. And there's not one thing that works for everybody, even if you're talking about getting rid of addiction. Other than physically keeping the drugs or whatever away from the person, but that doesn't mean that they don't still want it. That doesn't cure the addiction. It just cures the substance, whatever it might be. So with that being said, everything you just told us, what is your approach? What give us in a nutshell what your book is about and how it keeps people or has people end their overeating cycles?
There's a shift of paradigm. So to explain it, I'd first like you to understand what happens when people have the experience that they've lost control. And I think, most people have had the experience of edging up on a bar of chocolate and telling themselves they're going to have a bite or two, and then before they know it, they've had the whole bar and a couple of muffins to wash it down and a double latte, and they really kind of gone overboard. And it feels like their goals, their best laid plans, their aspirations, those have all disappeared. And what I'd like people to do is think about really two different parts of us. It's not quite this simple neurologically, but if you think that we've got the midbrain, the lizard brain, kind of the earlier evolved primitive part of ourselves, and then we've got the neocortex and the part of us which delays gratification and looks to accomplish goals and thinks logically, and even the part of us that connects with other people and forms a tribe and wants community. And you think they're really separate. And the lizard brain, when it sees something in the environment, it only makes one of three choices. Do I kill it? Do I mate with it? Or do I eat it? Right? It's a very, very primitive part of us. And what happens with addictions, which is really, really enhanced by the food industry in particular, is that the lizard brain, which is supposed to be there to protect us, which is supposed to, that's the thing that makes us breathe oxygen when we need it. That's the thing that, craves leafy green vegetables to, get the chlorophyll and kind of get some of the natural energy into our system. But because we live in a world where big industry has an incentive to put the most calories into the smallest space with best packaging, and then spend billions of dollars to get you to believe that it's healthy and to overstimulate your lizard brain to want it. I think I saw a study that said children are exposed to 5,000 or 7,000 advertising messages a year, and not one of them says eat more fruit and vegetables.
Right.
And so what we have is this constant programming to eat hyper palatable foods that really eliminate the part of us that matters, the neocortex, the mammalian brain that forms connections and love bonds. And so everybody has this experience, and we all joke about it. We all run around and joke about it, but just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. Or, I had
right.
I went to war with a bagel and the bagel won. Everybody's had that experience, and so that's why things are so out of control. And then on the other hand, you think about the addiction industry saying, well, I bet you really can't just have just one. And you're too weak to do that. And so there's all this money coming at us, billions and billions of dollars trying to get us to overindulge. And then there's this overwhelming force saying you can't help yourself. So no wonder everybody's in trouble. And I forgot the original question. Did I answer your original question?
No, I was asking what's the real method to your system.
Oh, okay. So, and I had to provide some context to...
Exactly, yeah. I understand.
So, now here's the problem. With the traditional methods in the treatment industry, they're basically, if you boil it all down and oversimplify it, they're saying, you've really got to nurture your inner wounded child before you can stop overdoing it. You're overeating because your mama and your papa didn't love you enough, and you don't have enough community in your life, and you need more hugs, and you've got too much stress in your life, and you've got to work out all these psychological problems to stop overeating. And if you go back to the neurological model, well, what happens at the moment of impulse when that lizard brain wants the chocolate is, if you've got the message in your brain that says, I've got to nurture my inner wounded child wants chocolate, and you say, well, our poor baby, well, then the lizard brain gets worse. It gets more control. And so even though there's a very strong correlation between overeating and psychological issues and a lack of fulfillment and love, nurturing your inner wounded child, it's very difficult to love yourself thin. You should nurture your inner wounded child for other reasons. I'm a compassionate person. I'm not some bastard that really just wants everybody to be harsh with themselves. But the practical technique requires a method that helps you cultivate a sense of disgust for that survival drive gone wrong, and teaches you to think of it like a rabid Doberman pinscher, and you've got to have the attitude towards it that you're going to cage it, and it's almost like an intent to kill. You can't actually kill it because you need it, but it's an intent to kill, which is how dominant animals treat their subordinates if the subordinate challenges them. If they want to just be part of the pack and kind of fall in line, that's fine. But the moment, the moment a lower wolf challenges the alpha wolf, that alpha wolf snarls and is ready to kill. And so you need that guttural sense of disgust when the impulse comes through. And I'll tell you how I figured it out. And when I work with people, we use different names and different imagery for each person. But I had been reading a lot of literature. I wish this didn't take me 30 years to figure out, because it's going to sound very simple and crude as compared to my level of sophistication and credentials, but I read a lot of literature on addiction, and I came across a guy named Jack Trimpey in a place called Rational Recovery. I think his website is rational.org. And basically what he said was that you need to think of the lizard brain as a completely separate entity, and you need to be really clear on what your rules are. He works mostly with the black and white addictions, like drinking and alcohol, drinking and smoking, and things that you can quit 100%. You need to be really clear about what your rules are, and then you need to listen for any voice whatsoever that tells you to break those rules. And that voice is trouble, and that's the voice you want to feel disgusted with and learn to ignore. And so what I did was I said, well, okay, the elements of this are a separate entity. So I decided that my lizard brain, when it came to food, I was going to call it the pig. And I was going to make a rule. Like, for me, chocolate was a big deal. I could eat bars and bars of chocolate. So I said, I'm never going to have chocolate again. And if I'm never going to have chocolate again, then any little voice I hear in my head that suggests that I should have chocolate for any reason whatsoever, either now or in the future, that's pig squeal. And the chocolate, right?
Yeah.
The chocolate itself is pig slop. And my pig is squealing for pig slop. I don't eat pig slop, and I don't listen to farm animals tell me what to eat. It wasn't perfect. It was kind of a gradual process of learning this. But I started to get this feeling of disgust when the pig would squeal. And so, I remember this one time I'm approaching a chocolate bar as I'm about to pay for my coffee, and there's this big hairy chocolate bar looking at me on the counter, and the closer I got, the better it looked. And I remember listening to the pig saying, Glenn, you're supposed to eat a lot of vegetables, and chocolate comes from cocoa beans, and cocoa beans grow in the plants. Chocolate's a vegetable. And as crazy as it sounds, in the moment of impulse, because it's like your neocortex and your higher order brain functions, they disappear at the moment. They're not really gone, but it feels like they've disappeared. And that's all I needed to justify it for that moment. And so going forward, I could say, well, no, that's pig squeal. That's so obviously pig squeal. I just ignore it. I'm not going to nurture it. I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm going to dismiss it. And I just got better and better and better at doing that. And my pig would say all sorts of entertaining things, which I started to recognize as just sneaky pig squeal. And I lost 60 pounds, and I kind of lost the food obsession. And I would occasionally make a mistake, but I would get right back up again. And by the way, if you make a mistake, the pig will tell you that this obviously doesn't work and you're too weak. And
right.
Yeah.
So it was a relapse, not a collapse, is what you're telling us. That you made a mistake and you just kept going as if you hadn't.
Yes, that's the appropriate behavior. I would just prefer to call it a mistake as opposed to a relapse, because a relapse suggests that there's a disease, and I don't think there's any proof that there's actually a disease. And
gotcha. Yes,
yep.
I certainly didn't mean it with those connotations.
Well, no, but it conveyed exactly what people should do. But I think you're not the only one who would have said it. I think just about anybody in our culture might have used that analogy, because the terminology is so it's infiltrated our language. We really believe that we're just waiting for this disease to overtake us and have a relapse. That a disease is something a doctor needs to treat, and what I'm saying is that this is really in your power. This is this is free will and responsibility, and it's just kind of a part of human nature, and so that's what I'm saying.
So tell me how you fight the rationalization. Now, you gave me an example of how chocolate is a vegetable, and et cetera, and you could have gone another way, that chocolate is good for you because of the phytochemicals and things like that. So what if, let's say, you've been doing great for several years, you've lost all your excess body fat, and now you see a chocolate bar and you think, well, why not? I like the taste of it. I enjoy it. I deserve it. I had a hard day. I want it, as opposed to feeling I need it. How do you how do you differentiate your pig squeal, even now, even today, versus just treating yourself once in a while?
Well, first of all, you can change your food plan whenever you want to. And I like people to change their food plans with serious forethought and consideration, and that way they know that it's them, their higher self, that is making those changes, and not impulsively when you happen to see it at the counter because the pig says, do you really want this? You deserve it. It's really good for you. So I wouldn't want people to think that I was just in favor of restriction for life. As a matter of fact, over-restriction is a really good way to stimulate more binging. However, I don't have chocolate no matter what my pig says. And that particular example, I would understand my pig as squealing. I would understand that all as pig squeal, because when I was of sound mind and body, and I'd thought it through really carefully, and I'd done enough experimenting with different ways I could have it once in a while, and I really very carefully intellectually evaluated that never was better than sometimes for me in particular. I made this decision the same way that when when someone gets married, they carefully evaluate their mate, and they make a commitment, which is a very determined, permanent commitment. You don't hear this vow at a wedding. You don't hear people saying, gee, I'm about 80% sure that I can be faithful to you forever, but there sure are a lot of attractive people out there. Right? And I'm just being honest. You want me to be honest, right?
Yeah, this is the time for it, right?
Yeah. So it's like that. It's not quite a marriage vow, because you need to be open to learning and evolving and maturing, and your body changes, and there's new nutritional evidence that comes out, and you want to be able to take advantage of all that. But I describe it more like almost like a legislative process. The changes in the law, there's a reason why we can't change the law tomorrow. There's a reason why there's a process of intellectual evaluation and debate and voting. And so I like to think of your food plan kind of like the law, and you can go through a legislative process with yourself to change it and really evaluate it. But you don't want to let your pig change and evaluate it on the spur of the moment because something looks good. And that's the best answer I've found.
Yeah, I sometimes do a thing with my clients and my health coaching clients. I say, plan your meals. So at night, let's say tonight, plan everything you're going to eat for the next day, and don't stray from that at all. And you could even plan little snacks and treats. If you want to plan chocolate or cookie or ice cream or alcohol, whatever, put that in there. But if you don't plan it, you cannot have it. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have it just because it's in the plan. So if you stick an afternoon candy, dessert, sweet treat in there, doesn't mean you have to have it. If you get up to that time, you're like, yeah, I don't really care. It's fine to go away with it. But that's kind of the same idea as what I hear you saying.
Exactly. That's a great advice. Yeah. Glenn, I kind of think of it, if I could just say, I think of it as if I were a city traffic planner, or my client was a city traffic planner. And what you want to do is figure out where the dangerous intersections are, and put stop signs and sometimes traffic lights, sometimes yield signs. Put them in the right places to protect the populace from those dangerous intersections, but don't put one at every intersection because you're going to slow people down.
Oh yeah, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Now, did you say you don't eat chocolate at all anymore?
I don't.
Is that because it's a trigger, and it would trigger? I don't want to say relapse, but back to the way you were before?
But because I've discovered that never is easier than sometimes. When I've gone through experiments with that over the years. I've tried to. My sister can take out a chocolate bar and eat 2 little squares and put it back and say, I'm so addicted to chocolate. But I don't see.
No, she's not.
I don't see the point. I would eat that chocolate bar and 4 more when I do that. There's something about the way that the obramine or the sugar or the fat or some of the combination affects me, that it makes my body race, and then I feel like I need something to slow it down. So I want something very starchy and sugary to slow it down. And then I want to go overeat on some protein. And it just,
Wow. It sets up quite a chain reaction.
It sets up a chain reaction for me. And would it be possible to use this technique to stop myself from doing that? It would, but it would be really uncomfortable. And just in the same way, it's possible to go sit in a burning house if you've got a flame retardant suit, but why do I want to live like that?
But why? Yeah, and I personally agree with you, and that's what works best for me. Is there certain things that unless I am free to eat, let's say, as much as I want, in quotes, I won't have any. So, for example, things like, chips or French fries or things like that, there's no reason to eat just one. And so most of the time, unless I want to eat, a full portion of it, I just won't have any at all. It's really rare that I'd eat a French fry and be good with that. It's happened, but I prefer just to stay away from it unless I give myself that permission. Okay, go for it and have an order of fries.
Yeah. The other thing about it is that our pigs will tell us that that's too depriving. If you never have chocolate again, you're never going to enjoy the mouth feel and the high that comes with, for hours after you've had it, and you're never going to enjoy the kind of fatty, creamy feeling in your mouth. And it'll go on and on about how much deprivation we're going to endure. But there's another type of deprivation, and I have to credit Jeannie Roth with pointing this out first. The other type of deprivation is the deprivation of being able to accomplish your goals and dreams. And so when I would choose to have some chocolate once in a while because I didn't want to be too deprived, well, I would not get the experience of not having chocolate. I would not get the experience of my triglycerides going down and being, 200 pounds instead of 260 pounds. And I would probably lose the experience of getting to enjoy watching my little niece and nephew, grow up and get married. And, I would not get to have the experience of being free of diabetes. And or even on a more immediate level, I wouldn't get to experience the tranquility and clean, contented energy that I can use to go walk around in nature and breathe by the river or go do yoga. It upsets my whole system. And so part of this is really understanding what your big why is, and not just you're going to give up chocolate because you were a bad boy and you can't have chocolate, but what is it you're going to get by not having chocolate, and remembering that the issue really isn't, are you going to deprive yourself of chocolate or not? The issue is, what are you going to deprive yourself of, chocolate or diabetes? And right, so then it becomes a much easier decision.
Well, that would be an easy decision if it was that cut and dry, but there's many arguments that say, well, how do you know I'm going to get diabetes if I don't eat chocolate? Maybe I'll get it anyways, or maybe I wouldn't get it anyways. So the problem with humans is that we're not machines or computers, and there's so much flexibility in there.
It's right, and I was using a caricature as an example. And it's not completely predictable, but on an individual basis, people, the changes I help people make are the ones that they really believe in for their health. So I wouldn't necessarily be the guy that was trying to convince you that you're going to get diabetes if you keep eating chocolate, because I don't think everybody does. But if you came to me and you said, I'm really worried I'm going to get diabetes and I want to see my grandkids go to college, then that's when you can use that motivation.
Now, a lot of people end up punishing themselves. They call themselves really nasty things. They'll go out and exercise. You used to, do excessive exercise. So let's say you, not you necessarily, but a person, they eat that thing that triggers them, and then they eat a bunch more, and now they feel really lousy, both guilty mentally because they knew that was wrong in the first place, and then they also feel, of course, physically bad because they've overloaded their bodies with starches and sugars and whatever else is in there. And maybe they're cussing themselves while they go run 15 miles all at one time for their penance. What do you? I'm sure that's not part of your philosophy and your steps for your method, but it's very common. What do you say to that?
Well, it's actually very interesting, because when you start separating your thoughts into the constructive and healthy thoughts versus the destructive pig-like thoughts, you start to recognize that the purpose of the punishment is to make it possible to binge again. And like during the binge, people begin to yell at themselves, and if they can make a rule that they're not allowed to yell at themselves, they'll find it very difficult to keep binging. Because what's really happening is the pig is trying to beat down your moral character so that you won't try to stop it from doing what it wants to do.
Wow.
You're too weak, you're pathetic, you're always going to be fat, you should just stop and be a happy fat person. You can't go out. You can't go out because you're too fat and you're all bloated and you don't have the energy and you're going to have to sleep it off tonight. So
let me do a little role play here. So let's say I walk into a store and I'm buying my milk and eggs and loaf of whole wheat bread, and in the check stand aisle there's all the candy there, and I think, well, I'm doing pretty good. I haven't had any candy in a long time. I'm going to grab some of these, peanut M&Ms, which happen to be one of my personal favorites. Mm-hmm. So I grab one. I'm like, well, they're 3 for $2. I might as well save some money. It would be just wasting money if I only bought the one, right? Okay, so here we got this rationalization that's building and building. I go home, and before I even get home, I've finished off 2 of those bags before I even get a chance to make my breakfast or lunch, whatever meal I was going to make for myself. And before I get home, and then I eat the other bag while I'm making this healthy meal. And then I go ahead, and now I don't want the healthy meal because I've got this sugar fat taste in my mouth. So I eat some other stuff. And now I'm really mad at myself because I let the pig win, and so I go to punish myself, and that is to give the pig more energy. Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So next time when I'm facing that same situation, I'm not going to hassle it. I'm just going to give in immediately.
The moment that you recognize what's going on, what you want to say, wait a minute, I always use the present moment to be healthy. And I like people to treat their food plans like they would treat a sacred law, because this is the thing that protects you and protects you and all of your goals and aspirations. And so once you recognize that you broke your own law, you take it seriously, just like you would take having recognized that you that you shoplifted, or you accidentally decided to put your hand on a woman's leg in the bus or something like that. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of impulses that we have on a daily basis that we're really capable of controlling, and so what you want to do is figure out what was the pig squeal that convinced you to do this, and how come you didn't hear it? Or if you heard it, why did you choose to do it anyway? And that's really the relevant part. And then you need to ask yourself, well, what do I want to do about that? Do I need to change my food rules for any reason, or did I just let the pig come through? And if you just let the pig come through, then you say, I always use the present moment to be healthy. And sometimes I tell people, either in their head if they're in public or if they're in the car or something, to put their middle finger up and imagine giving the middle finger to the pig and saying, this is just how it is, pig, live with it. and the reason I want them to do that is because you can't do a lot more rational analysis during that moment of impulse when the pig took over. Remember, the lizard brain really has control at that point.
Yes.
But you will have access to the primitive sense of aggression. And so you want to give that aggression, you want to direct it at the pig as opposed to at yourself. So I'd rather people yelled at the pig than yell at themselves.
Yeah.
And you've asked a couple of questions about dealing with the rationalizations. So the first answer is that the rationalizations become crystal clear if your rules are crystal clear. And so if you're saying, well, I worked really hard and I deserved it, but if you said I'm never going to have chocolate again, then you immediately recognize that as pig squeal. If if you can't find a food role against which the rationalization is pig squeal, so if it looks like the rationalization might actually make sense, then you need to evaluate your plan and see if you need something new to protect yourself. So generally speaking, arguing with the pig, debating with the pig, feeling like you have to have an answer, it usually doesn't work at the moment of impulse because you don't really have access to your rational brain at that moment. It's almost like you have to say, well, because I said so, and this is just how it is. When you do have your rational brain later, it can be useful to look at the very particular pig squeal and come up with a better rational response. So if the pig says, I really worked hard for it, I deserve it, you might want to say, well, yeah, but I really deserve to take off this last 5 pounds, and I really deserve to be able to hike to the top of the mountain, and I really deserve to fit into that sexy dress that I want to wear.
Right.
Not you, Glenn. But,
No, I get what you're saying. No, I totally understand what you're saying. And just because you deserve a sweet treat for your hard or stressful day doesn't mean, well, just because you deserve some sort of reward or de-stress period for your long and hard day doesn't mean it has to be the trigger that sets you down a snowball gathering of worse feelings.
Well, and there's all kinds of other ways to treat yourself, and on a rational basis, we all know that. But at the moment, that lizard brain is taking over, and you need something guttural to overcome it.
Right, and but it's really strange how often I see this self-deprecating actions and self-sabotage flare up with people. Even your self-talk. People tend to have a negative self-talk more often than a positive self-talk. It's as if positive seems too superficial or silly, but negative self-talk is more real. And if you look at things like reviewers, movie reviewers, book reviewers, they almost always find fault in it. And I guess it makes them feel smarter, or it makes other people think that they're smarter, that they're well beyond this movie, that they have to stoop down just to see this movie. And if they just liked it like most other people would, then they would lose respect. Is that that's kind of the way I see it. Now, professionally, what do you see people's drive for self-destruction?
That's a very deep question, and I agree with you. I think that I think that there's a tremendous amount of aggression in society, and most people are not taught the difference between the constructive expression of that aggression to clear the mind in a way that's good for them and good for the people around them, and the destructive expression of that aggression towards others or towards themselves. And so there's a tremendous amount of frustration that everybody experiences. Really, it's frustration and hate. I know that's a strong word. And they don't know what to do with it. And so, I mean, look at all the wars if you don't believe there's a lot of hate in the world.
Right.
And so a lot of it is directed at ourselves. I think that this is kind of a classical analytical view, and I don't agree with a lot of classical analytical things, but I do think society is anti-instinctual, and I think that there's, in the absence of specific training to think positively and direct your frustration in constructive ways towards yourself and others, I think that people are naturally self-destructive in their thinking and self-destructive in their communications. And it's very possible to turn that around, but it's important to recognize that there is that tendency in the human animal in the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and I see that as a self-defense mechanism. People seem to be scared of the unknown. In the ancient days, before we discovered the entire planet, we drew monsters and serpents out in the ocean where we hadn't been yet before, and kids are afraid of the dark, etc. And so there is a certain instinctual preservation benefit or value to it, but it's too bad that we will still bring ourselves down. We should be our best friend. Instead, we're putting ourselves down like you wouldn't put down your outside best friend.
Right, exactly.
And that kind of goes along with eating. And sometimes people will overeat to punish themselves as well.
Yes. However, it's a little dangerous, Glenn, it's a little dangerous to ascribe the cause for that. Because the conclusion from that would be that until I figure out what I'm punishing myself for, I might as well keep overeating, and that's a pig squeal. But
I see.
But I've had clients who've said, I made this mistake, so I'm eating at myself to punish myself, and it's a real experience. Just don't get caught up in the idea that you have to figure out why before you can fix it.
Gotcha. Well, your system sounds really, really fantastic. And you said something in our pre-interview that really sang with me for a moment. You were saying that there's a lot of pressure to overeat and to binge eat, and that your problems will be solved if you eat this, and this will make you happy, and all those other things. Am I getting that right?
Well, that's the message that billions of dollars of advertising gives us when you see all these happy, smiling people having candy bars and all the junk. So
have a Coke and a smile, etc. But aside from passing laws that there's no advertising of junk food, and what can we really do? I mean, basically humans are fairly weak when it comes to these certain advertisers, and when we're getting bombarded by this stuff everywhere, everywhere we look, like there it is, there's Coke, there's Coke, there's Coke, there's Coke, there's Coke. What are we to do?
Make decisions of character. Make really clear lines. For example, when was the last time that you robbed a bank, Glenn?
It's been a while. I can't even remember It's been so long.
But you're not a bank robber, right?
No, I'm not.
Right. And when was the last time you grabbed a stranger on the bus and kissed them?
Never.
Yeah. There are all sorts of impulses that we control as a matter of character, either because society says we have to control it or not. And so the idea that we can't because there's all this temptation out there, there's always been temptation out there. There's always going to be a tremendous amount of temptation out there. And I don't think we should pass laws that prohibit advertising, or right. I actually believe in capitalism and democracy, and I'm not that much of a liberal. I'm a liberal, but not that much of a liberal. Right. I think that we should fight it with pre-planning and decisions. Willpower is a fatigable muscle, because willpower is the ability to endure decisions and continue to endure decision points and continue to make good decisions. But if you've made the decisions a priori, because I'll never eat chocolate again, then it doesn't require any willpower to not have chocolate, because I'm not the kind of person who eats chocolate. It's a matter of the kind of person I am, not whether I'm going to succumb to anything that anybody says about it, or how the packaging looks, or anything like that. It's just, I'm the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate.
Well, and like when I walk by a bank, I'm never tempted to rob one.
I know.
So that makes a lot of sense. If we just put our mindset in the direction that that's not something you do, and that's not even something I want because it's not something I want, and I don't have to use willpower, then problem solved.
Problem solved.
All right. I love it. Thank you very much, Glenn. And by the way, you spell your name right. I'm really glad to see that.
Yes, we got to stick together.
Yeah, us two and Glenn's got to stick together. So thank you very much. I am really pleased to talk with you. I have to go because I have another interview. Otherwise, I'd probably talk to you for another hour. So where would they find your free book?
neverbingeagain.com. And if you click on the big red button, sign up for the reader bonuses, you'll also get food food plan templates, and more importantly, rather than hearing me talk about this in the abstract and theoretically, there's a whole bunch of recorded coaching sessions so you can hear how this works with real people in real time.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. I will have that link and others on my show notes page at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Livingston, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks, Glenn, very much.
His point about good health being worth more to him than binging on chocolate is very powerful. I think this is where most people really get stuck. They dwell on the substance they, air quote, can't have rather than the benefit that they are gaining from not having it. You can find out more in his book, Never Binge Again. I'll have a link to it in my show notes page at livefitpodcast.com. This is episode 103, so you could do livefitpodcast.com/podcast/ep103. But check it out. His book is free, Never Binge Again. It's a free Kindle book on Amazon, or you can get the audio version for $2. Imagine that, $2. You can listen to it while you're driving your car to work. Or, hey, walking on a treadmill. I like that one even better. All right, guys. Wonderful talking to you as usual. Next episode, I'm going to have another wonderful, scintillating talk from Dr. Will Harden. We have another Wednesdays with Will coming up. Talk to you then. Ciao.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.